Something's wrong, isn't it? Kevin Hollinbroke's here. Kevin, very good morning to you.
Morning, mate.
So, we'll get on to the prisoners and stuff, I suppose, in a moment. Let's talk just very quickly about Chris Cabba and the case against the sergeant who has now been told he has to probably stay in hiding for the rest of his life, Sgt Martin Blake. I mean, the CPS have got some serious questions to answer about this case, haven't they?
I think they have, and we've got to look at the system as a whole. I mean, we asked these police officers, these armed response teams, to go out and do a very, very difficult job. And if we don't support them in all reasonable circumstances, nobody will do the job, which would be, obviously, it would be horrendous in terms of the impact on society. So we've got to support them. The rules have got to be, the officers themselves have got to feel that they are supported by the system. And I think this case looks very much like this officer wasn't supported by the system. And it should be the case now that he doesn't have to go through this disciplinary, I would say, and that his name is completely exonerated in terms of anything that might have happened, and that we protect him, because I understand now he's in fear of his life. Yeah,
well, exactly right. And that means that, you know, he probably won't ever be able to work as a police officer again. He'll probably have to be relocated in some way. I mean, who knows? He might even have to end up in the witness protection programme or something. But it seems to me to have been a very unwise decision to release his name, while at the same time the judge decided not to release information about Chris Cabba, which was entirely relevant to the case.
Well, it shows also we need to clamp down on these gangs, doesn't it? Put more police on the case in terms of breaking up these gangs. I mean, it's the influence they seem to have in society. If they can really undermine our police forces, our armed response teams, our security officers, all those kind of things, it's a very serious state of affairs.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking at that video that we've got there for you of a man, Chris Cabba, running down the street after another man, pointing a gun at him, shooting him. We've got pictures in the papers today of the same man, the victim, lying sort of in a pool of blood. I mean, these are scenes from London streets, and this is from a couple of years ago. I mean, surely Sadiq Khan's got some role in making the streets. He keeps telling us he's making London streets safer. Well, clearly not.
Absolutely. We've got to be tougher, Mike. We're too soft in many cases, and, you know, we put 20,000 more police back on the beat, but those police officers have got to spend more time on the beat rather than doing paperwork and working behind the scenes. You know, they want to be a more visible police presence. I think most of the public I speak to want to see that, and we've got to step up our response to some of these drug gangs, and they really undermine people's feeling of security and safety on our streets, and that can't be right.
No, I mean, it's terrifying to see that kind of activity. Imagine if you're just walking down the street, you're minding your own business. Incredible. Let's talk a bit about Rachel Reeves and the Treasury. I know this is part of your remit as the Salary Secretary of State for Business. I was shocked to read this morning in the Times, I don't know whether you've seen this, that basically the planned tax rate on employers' pension contributions, which is going to mean that every company in the land is going to have to pay more in national insurance on behalf of their employees. Apparently it's not going to apply to the public sector, who are going to be able to get a refund on any extra money that they have to pay into the Treasury. Surely that's making it two-tier business, isn't it?
Well, the reality is employers don't make endless profits. They have a certain amount of money they can dedicate to the payroll, and that's particularly for private sector employers.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that those employers are going to have to cut back, either increase prices, and that's what they said to do in the impact assessment. Recently, we saw only a couple of days ago on the employment rights, when people have extra burdens, extra costs, they have to, two things they can do, either cut costs or increase prices. 40% of firms said they'd increase prices, about 20% said they would cut costs, cut jobs, in other words. So that's what private sector employers have to deal with, while the public sector is not affected at all. So their salaries, their people can keep getting pay increases and very generous pensions, where people in the private sector cannot. That cannot be right. You know, Winston Churchill said the private enterprise is the strong horse that pulls the whole cart. It seems like the cart is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and putting more pressure on that strong horse.
Well, exactly right, because I find it rather ironic that the Treasury says that public sector employers will be reimbursed, because otherwise they would have to make significant cuts to their budgets. Well, yeah, that's exactly what private sector companies are going to have to do. So how is it good for the goose but not for the gander? And they reckon this will cost us, the taxpayer, about £5 billion.
Well, she said everything, hasn't she? You know, the fact is, she recognises that if you didn't do this in the public sector, you'd have to cut back on jobs, cut back on costs, cut back on salaries. Well, what do you think the private sector is going to do? It's not making endless profits. This is not going to come out of profits because in a competitive market, profits are eroded away to a certain level. So employers will have to make cuts. So Rachel Reeves called an increase in employers' national insurance a few years ago a jobs tax because it really disincentivises people taking more people on in their businesses. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So this will mean fewer jobs, and those jobs will be less well paid.
Yes, and so fewer jobs mean fewer money. The IMF are now warning this morning to Rachel Reeves that, you know, growth is actually looking not bad. Not necessarily thanks to anything the Labour government have done, but things that were done before the Labour government got in, shall we say. And they're saying to her, if you really do attack tax in this way, and if you really do attack companies and you attack workers in this way, it's not going to be good for growth.
Totally. I mean, this nonsense about a £22 billion black hole, which was created by Rachel Reeves by abandoning Rwanda and this above-inflation pay rise for public sector workers. I mean, that's created the black hole and created the spending pressure. What she should have done is tiny increases. I'm not against increases to public sector workers. I think that level was recommended by the independent pay boards. But it should be tied to efficiencies. Yeah. We know the public sector is no more efficient. In fact, it's less efficient, about 5-6% less efficient than it was pre-COVID, where the private sector is more efficient. So what we should be working on with those kind of pay deals and with train drivers is ask for efficiency savings. And that's how you pay for those things. What's actually happened here, the unions have come along and said to the new Labour government, they've been funding for 14 years in opposition, these are the pay rises we want. We don't want any questions asked, any strings attached, and that's exactly what the Labour government did, what Starmer and Reeves did. They paid up in full, no questions asked.
Well, now we've got the Institute of Directors as well saying to Angela Rayner that this workers' rights overhaul that she's planning could end up costing employers another $5 billion. So that's already $10 billion it's going to cost them for all of this, change that Labour wants to make so that people can have more time off, they can have more flexible working, they can have more, rights immediately as soon as they start in the job. What do you make of it all?
Well, I mean, we debated this heavily in Parliament on Monday, and I was appalled, actually, by Angela Rayner, who led the debate, and Johnny Reynolds, who concluded the debate for Labour. I mean, I raised the point, this is which is acknowledged in the impact assessment, the government's own impact assessment. It is acknowledged that the burden, that £5 billion burden, falls most heavily on small businesses, and yet they just completely dismiss that because all they care about is trying to give trade unions more and more powers. That's the reality. If you look behind that impact assessment, that £5 billion you refer to, that will be found by businesses because they haven't got endless money to pay this by increasing prices. 2 in 5 companies say they'll increase prices. 1 in 5 say they'll cut jobs. It's an utter disgrace, but all they want to do is please their union paymasters.
It would seem so. And please each other, of course, because the old dynastic approach to politics continues. I was just reading this morning that Wes Streeting's fiancé has been given a senior policy role at Labour HQ, apparently provoking further commentary about the party's dynastic internal politics. He's going to get £105,000 a year, apparently second biggest job in the party's internal network after Matthew Doyle, who's the Director of Communications for Keir Starmer. Now, this is a guy who Wes Streeting, I think, managed to get to stand for election, but he didn't win his seat. I think it was up in the North East. He lost, I think, to Matt Vickers. And so now they found him a job in London. Nice work if you can get it, eh? Jobs for the boys and all that.
Well, it's the hypocrisy I can't stand, Mike, and I'm sure you feel the same. When Keir Starmer and his colleagues were setting themselves up to be paragons of virtue, and then when they're found to be doing this kind of stuff, whether it be taking tickets to Taylor Swift or giving their mates jobs, no, they're guilty of nothing because they are paragons of virtue. They can't be unvirtuous because they've set themselves up and they say so. Right. It's so sanctimonious, it's quite unbelievable. Mm. So massive hypocrisy we see from Keir Starmer and his cabinet colleagues.
Absolutely right. Kevin, good to talk to you. Kevin Hollinbrake, MP, Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade.